We now turn to our discussants. Ha-Joon Chang.
Right, thank you. Well, three excellent and fascinating papers which all fit together. So I'll, try to quickly go through some relatively minor points. Well, first on Philip's paper, education. I think I am in favor of having more education, but I think the productivity effect of education is a bit more debatable. I mean, there's evidence, for example, things produced by Land Pritchard at Kennedy School at Harvard which show that the correlation between education and economic performance is quite unclear. In the book that was included in your pack, I have a chapter on education where I talk about what I call the Swiss paradox, where Switzerland has by far the lowest enrollment ratio in university among the OECD countries. I mean, less than half, sometimes 1/3 of OECD average, but maintaining very high productivity economy. So we need to explore this a bit more. On industrial policy, combining Roman's comment, first of all, this issue of targeting, I think is a false conceptualization, because all policies are targeted at some level. That people say, you have to do horizontal policies like R&D support. Well, it's targeted at R&D intensive sectors. So there is no policy that is not targeted at all. So first of all, it's a matter of degree, and targeting has the pros and cons. I'm in favor of targeting myself, but for example, a lot of people will argue that targeting is better when they discuss social policy. But then why do they say targeting doesn't work in industrial policy? So we see some ideological bias there. So we need to figure out why it may or may not work. But more importantly, this argument that Roman mentioned, not necessarily supporting it, that this idea that government cannot pick winners. Essentially this is based on this knowledge argument. Government doesn't know what's really going on, so how can they pick winners? But if being closer to the situation makes you a better decision maker, why would firms fail? When AOL and Time Warner merged, they hailed it, the guys who are doing it, hailed it as a historic merger that will change the landscape of the IT industry. 10 years later, it's a complete failure. And a lot of people could see it from outside, but the guys who were actually in it couldn't see it. So this the assumption is questionable. Secondly, there are lots of successes of government winner picking. I don't need to go into them. I've written a lot of stuff on that, and you can also look at it from chapter 12 of my book. But more importantly, this idea that winner picking is something that government does when it shouldn't is wrong, because winner picking is actually the essence of entrepreneurship. The entrepreneurs succeed exactly because they do something that everyone thinks they will fail. Everyone thinks it's not going to work, and that's the essence of entrepreneurship. So actually, the private sector success is based on picking winners. So we need to change the whole perspective, and in that, Janeway's paper really gives very useful guidelines. I think his paper provides an excellent framework integrating neoclassical, Keynesian, and Schumpeterian perspectives. He only actually talks about two types of waste, but three types of waste: neoclassical, Keynesian, or Schumpeterian. And this argument that Schumpeterian waste is necessary for dynamic economy, I completely agree. I mean, for example, I think it was in his Bell Journal of Economics article in the early 1980s, Dick Nelson, I mean, I remember saying that, well, you know, actually the most quote-unquote efficient way to organize R&D is the Soviet system, yeah? One provider, but actually that is not the better system for innovation. Yeah? So we have to accept this degree of the waste. I would like to simply add that, however, that we also need to explore different forms of creating this system which is dynamic and innovative. I mean, of course, the U.S. support for research and development, various, the kind of wasteful investment in scientific research and so on is obviously one way, but we can also look at industrial policy that Philip was talking about from that perspective. Yeah? So that if I give some example that, for example, in the so-called miracle economies of East Asia, people found it very difficult to understand that there were these economies growing at 9, 10, 11%, breaking into new industries, making fantastic technological progresses, but the banking sector is riddled with non-performing loans. I mean, that's exactly the Schumpeterian waste. Yeah? So that when you bring in this perspective, you can actually make sense of this thing, which puzzles so many people, because for them, I mean, all waste is neoclassical or at most Keynesian. Huh? So the question is how, however, the question is how we make sure that this waste generating entrepreneurial process eventually leads to higher productivity. I mean, you have to design the system in the right way to get there. And I think in that, Bill Lazonik's paper gives some very important insights. I mean, you have to organize the corporate sector in the right way and link it with the good industrial policy. Just one comment on Bill's paper, and then I'll finish. Bill talked about the U.S. Being the most successful developmental state in history, and I would simply emphasize that this goes back actually much further than the Cold War programs and so on. I mean, actually, where is he? I mean, when I come to America, I always show this guy's face, Alexander Hamilton, the guy on the $10 bill. He is the guy who actually invented the core theory of developmental state, namely the infant industry argument. Yeah? And in chapter 7 of my book, I have a section called Dead Presidents Don't Talk, trying to argue that all the guys on the US dollar bills, from Washington, Lincoln to Hamilton and so on, they are guys who use policies that would have been totally rejected by mainstream economists. So that actually the history of US developmental state goes much further back. Thank you.